I want to say a few thank yous before I dive in with a formal introduction of you. And then, and you'll all be happy to know, as the ambassador and I reconnected outside in the foyer, he said to me, nothing's off limits. Ask me any question you want. I'm no longer a politician.
Kosher.
It's all kosher.
Glot kosher.
Yes.
Okay.
So if I don't ask what's on your mind, I encourage you to please ask what's on your mind. But I want to thank a few people for making tonight possible. First of all, the incredible team here at the Oshman family, JCC and Z3. You heard from Amitai earlier. Maya is also here, Dror from the Z3 team, but also the development team. You have Seth, you have Jessica, Michelle, and Megan as well. So a big thank you to the team from the Oshman family, JCC and Z3. But also a big thank you to the United Hatzalah folks who brought Ambassador Oren, who are bringing them around on a tour, but have just reached out to us. They're ideal partners. Not only is the work that they're doing so incredibly important on the ground, as you all know, that's why you're here, but they're ideal partners for working with us in the community. So Gavi and Doreen, thank you for reaching out, making this happen. And to Mark Donig and Jerry Silverman, lay leaders on the board, thank you also for everything that you do. All right, we're going to jump in here in a minute, but you should know something. This is truly a Lador Vador audience. I'm seeing out here, in some cases, 3 generations in the audience. There are kids that I knew when they were in preschool here who are now about to have a bat mitzvah, already had bat mitzvahs, going to college, or about to go to... It's truly special, and I think that that's because...
I'm looking at some of these young people here. I got some messages for you guys.
Yeah,
hold on. Okay.
We want to hear that. So, so let's dive in. Let me tell you a little bit about, for those of you who don't know Ambassador Oren, although I think all of you do, and he has been here before. He was here when his last book, actually 2 books ago, Ally, came out. You were here doing your book tour, but that was even before 2048 came out. But he's the author of some incredible books. You probably read 6 Days of War. You probably read Power, Faith, and Fantasy. These were national New York Times bestsellers. This was back when he was an historian. But even before that, he was an IDF lone soldier, served in the paratroopers, served as an IDF spokesperson, and then you all know that he became Israeli ambassador to the United States for, how many years was it? 4? 5 years? Just a few short years of your life.
Felt like
right?
10.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to hear some of those stories. And went into politics and is now working with the Israel Advocacy Group, which I hope you'll tell us a little bit about. Well, but you know, I thought I was going to start with the softballs and then kind of ease in. But let's just get right into it. We're all impatient to hear. We're all heartbroken. We're all stressed. We're all angry. And this is on this side of the ocean. Ambassador, tell us what's going on the Israeli side of the ocean.
How much time do we have?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
First of all, let me thank you first, Zach. Thank you all for coming tonight. A special thank you to Tammy, who makes everything happen. Say hi. Someone sees you there. We just flew in a couple hours ago. So, and this is our second event. So Tammy makes sure I'm caffeinated and keep it going. Thank you. What is happening in Israel? I'll be very frank with you. You know, I always want to bring a very upbeat message. It is very difficult now. It's a great challenge for me personally. I'm a person of great optimism. I'm a person of great faith. I believe that we are all here for a reason, and the state of Israel exists for a reason, and that there's meaning behind Jewish history and Jewish existence. I believe in all of that. And I'm also an historian with an historian's perspective, Jack. And I am very hard-pressed to find a precedent, short of 70 CE, where the Romans circling Jerusalem, besieging Jerusalem, and the Jews inside the city fighting one another and burning up their food storage, something that's remotely similar to what's going on in Israel today. We have a sort of across-the-board breakdown in credibility and trust, where the government does not trust the military echelon does not trust the government, and the population trusts nobody. Trusts nobody. And this is happening now. When I first started coming to American Jewish communities in the aftermath of October 7th, I can come and talk with a full heart about the unity of the people of Israel, drawing together. Yes, we had been so grievously, profoundly divided in the year before October 7th, and now we have come together. And actually, we surprised our enemies. One of the reasons that they launched that attack on October 7th, they thought we were so deeply divided and that we'd never be able to reunite. We united very, very quickly. But now that has begun to unravel, and unravel in a very, very dangerous way. In a way that's very difficult for Americans to understand. I have a sister, brother-in-law, wonderful people who live in LA, and I would say they're, left of center, Democrats. And they called me the other night, the first major demonstration after the execution of the 6 hostages. and said, we don't get it. We're looking at pictures on the TV. There's 300,000 people out protesting. They're not protesting against Hamas. They're protesting against Bibi. And we don't get it. We don't understand it. And to understand it, again, would take a long time, but let's see if I can do it on one foot, as they say. And to say that those 300,000 people, not only those 300 people, believe that somewhere along the line, Hamas was willing to accept a deal for the exchange of hostages, and that Netanyahu has added additional demands in order to perpetuate his political career. Fear that his time as prime minister would end, and he would have to appear in court to face 3 charges of corruption, not as prime minister Netanyahu, but as citizen Netanyahu, and could end up in prison. That is, believe it or not, in one foot, that is what the vast majority of people out there protesting actually believe. Now, whether it's reality or not, I personally have not found any evidence that Hamas is willing to accept any deal. Certainly not a deal that would fall short of their maximal demands, because the maximal demand is for a permanent ceasefire, the end of the war, such as the one that now everyone is calling for. The war must end. You're hearing again and again from Washington, and not only from Washington. The war must end. But a total withdrawal of Israeli troops to the international border, which means withdrawal from the Egyptian Gaza border, the Philadelphia route, the withdrawal from the Netzarim route, which divides North and South Gaza, and that's what's preventing Hamas terrorists from infiltrating to the north, along with Palestinian civilians returning to the north. And basically, Hamas continues to smuggle arms and can reemerge from the tunnels, go like this, because Hamas loves taking pictures on top of rubble, reconquer the Gaza Strip, and launch the next October 7th, because Mr. Sinwar, the head of Hamas, says they're willing to do it 10,000 times till Israel is destroyed. That's what they believe. But on the other hand, they also believe and know that if Israel doesn't return the hostages, then our DNA of the state will be irreparably impaired. Irreparably impaired. And it's very difficult for people not in the Israeli universe to understand this. The best example I can give you is 2 of our children, my daughter and my son, both combat veterans. My daughter, who says on October 7th, says to me, I don't care about who wins the war. As far as I'm concerned, we've lost the war. Israel has one job and one job only, and that is to return the hostages. Because if they don't return the hostages, then I will not be able to send my kids to the army. Her brother, who was wounded fighting Hamas, said, yes, but if we don't destroy Hamas, you won't have an army to send your kids to. And they're both right. And they're both right. That argument is going on in our hearts, in our souls, every single day. And for a while, we thought we could do both at the same time. And now it's come to a clash. And that clash is greatly, greatly exacerbated by this deficit of trust, this implosion of trust around the prime minister and the military, and the role of the United States. We can go into a deeper discussion about the role of the United States, which I think is overwhelmingly has exacerbated the situation, hasn't been very helpful. And I say this in a completely nonpartisan way. And this is where we are right now. I'll end by giving a conversation I had just before I got on the plane yesterday. I talked to my banker. This is never pleasant, but she's a lovely person. She has young kids, and she says to me, we have to give up everything to get the hostages back. Everything. I don't care. Give up Philadelphia, give up the Netzarim route, retreat to the border, everything, just to get the hostages back. And I said, okay, but theoretically, get the hostages back, Hamas conquers the Gaza Strip. Are you willing to move to the Gaza border with your young children? She said, absolutely not. There you have it. There you have it. Same time, situation in the North, which we can talk about. I've just spent a lot of time in the North. I'm here in the United States trying to raise awareness about the North. And the feeling that the people in the North, that the country has abandoned them, that no one cares about the fact that there are 100,000 Israelis who have been rendered homeless by this. They're under constant bombardment, dozens of Israelis killed and wounded. Earlier this month, I was in the reserve duty. I was back on reserve duty in uniform. Every day, bombardments. Young man, 28-year-old young man, killed up the road for me by a piece of shrapnel. So this is Israel's reality right now. If you take a snapshot of this country right now, it is difficult, not impossible, to see the way forward. It's difficult to sort of tap into that faith and optimism that lies at my core, but I shall try.
You paint a a tough picture, and it's the reality. It's not that Israel's divided. To your point, every Israeli is divided. Every Jew on the planet is divided, and I think what's also heartbreaking for those of us watching this from 10,000 miles away is how partisan it's become, right? As we're seeing these protests in the street, as we're seeing the anger and frustration play out against Israel's own government, we're trying to understand, so maybe you can help us understand also. You started to touch on this, but where is the pressure, and maybe this is the audience, where's the pressure on the American government? You wrote in your Substack article recently that, America coddling Iran is not the right way to play this. Why has America been playing it this way?
Oh, it's a long discussion. Okay, let me try to get you a little bit into our universe again, okay? Just a historical note. Israel was created on May 14th, 1948. We all know that. It's 3 years almost to the date after the Holocaust. Holocaust ends May 8th. All right, probably the most extraordinary event, certainly in modern history, maybe in all history. A people that survives the greatest massacre in human history turns around 3 years later and creates an independent state in our ancient homeland, fights off 5 Arab armies, no allies, no natural resources, and creates this. Right? Extraordinary accomplishment. Israel comes into being, though, in a very unique way. It comes on the basis of a covenant, not just a brit, in the Jewish sense, a brit. And the covenant says, what just happened 3 years ago can't happen again, because we're going to prevent it. We are going to defend the state and the people of Israel. Okay? That's one covenant. The other hand, the covenant says that if in the course of defending the state and the people of Israel, you are taken captive in some way, the state will do everything in its power to get you redeemed. So what Hamas did on October 7th was hit us between the eyes, not these eyes, but the pronoun eyes, the two parts of our defense identity, defending the state and the people and redeeming the hostages. And we simply can't reconcile that together. What is the United States? What role is the United States in? Iran is sort of the bigger picture. The smaller picture is Hamas and Hezbollah. There's a direct correlation. Listen, I have to preface this by saying I worked very closely with then Vice President Joe Biden, with his staff. The head of his policy team was a young man named Tony Blinken. Worked very closely with him. They are deeply committed to Israel's security, deeply committed to the U.S.-Israel strategic alliance, on an emotional level, too, on a personal emotional level. It's not just politics. And the speech that the president gave on October 7th was probably the greatest single speech I can remember in 50 years of studying U.S.-Israel relations. And we stood in front of the television sets at attention with tears streaming down our faces. But I also knew that we're entering an election year. I also knew that the media coverage was going to change, that there was a time limit on it, that the media would spend about 2.5 weeks dealing with Jewish suffering, and then would switch almost overnight to Palestinian suffering, and that would have an impact on American policy. And it was literally like time work. It happened just that way. And so the administration's initial policy was destroy Hamas. Hamas must be destroyed. By December, it was a specific date, when Anthony Blinken came to Israel and said, our policy has been completely unchanged, and then proceeded to completely change the policy by saying, our policy now is to ensure that another October 7th can never happen again, which is very different than saying destroy Hamas. By the spring, Hamas survives. It's all about the hostage deal. It's all about hostages, and the war must end. So it's very wide arc that gets us to a different place. In between that wide arc, remarks like Israel's response is over the top. Israel bombs indiscriminately, which is profoundly untrue. Every single bombing raid in Gaza goes through a very lengthy approving process, including with lawyers. Mistakes happen. Hamas hides among this population. Civilians get killed, but to say that we bombed indiscriminately is simply untrue. Quoting the Hamas figures, which is a whole other story. Hamas figures, the president went from initially saying Hamas fabricates his figures or inflates his figures to actually quoting them all the time, unreservedly, uncritically. And to saying we're dehumanizing the Palestinians. Too many Palestinians have been killed. You heard that a lot. Very strange locution, because that assumes that there's some number that would have been okay. Right? 7's too many, 5's okay. Really. So that created a way that contributed to the wave of delegitimization in the world, actions against us in the ICC and the ICJ, but what it also did, I think most impairingly, in fact disastrously, was to convince Mr. Sinwar that Times were working on his side. Right. and to get him to dig in. Because if he's thinking to himself, all I have to do is just sit quietly, let Israel kill more civilians, and eventually there'll be a rift. There'll be a breakdown in the U.S.-Israel relationship.
Can I ask you to pause for a second? Because I feel like this didn't have to go in that direction that you just laid out. Right? If America truly understood as the world's single global superpower, they should not be using the language of negotiating with terrorists, but putting the pressure on Iran, putting the pressure on Qatar, saying, if they really want to end this, why not end this by the only way you can treat a bully? You can't trust Hamas to negotiate anyway and keep their end of the bargain. So why is America playing right into their hands?
It has to be said, before I answer that question, because I have to say, listen, with all this, for the most part, the administration kept up a very heady flow of ammunition and spare parts to Israel with some very significant delays, kept on casting vetoes in the Security Council, and sent significant American forces to the Middle East. And right now, very significant forces, 2 aircraft fighter groups, a squadron F-22 jets, a nuclear submarine are there. That's not easy to do in America, where basically the only truly bipartisan issue in this country is isolationism, right? Not getting America involved in another war. But that plays into the answer to your question, Zach, and that is one of the idée fixes of this administration is not to get involved in a regional war. And we hear this all the time. We don't want to get caught in a regional war. I got some really bad news for them. We are in a regional war. We've been in a regional war since October 7th. They don't want America getting dragged into it. And they're willing to do everything possible not to get dragged into it. Back in, again, October 7th, 8th, the president came out with this famous one-word declaration, don't. Right? My kids got me a little hat that says don't on it. Right? But that don't now is much more aimed at Israel than it is to Iran and Hezbollah, because they heard don't, and they did.
They did on April.
Hezbollah went right ahead and shot, and then on April 14th, Iran fired 350 projectiles at us. All right, they did. But the don't is about us. And I understood that. I even understood that back in October, the don't was going to be about us, but now it's really quite clear. What is this about? Why is this? It's not just a fear of getting dragged into a regional and perhaps even international conflagration, which, by the way, is a legitimate fear. I'll give you the quick scenario. They start firing 6,000, 7,000 rockets a day at us. That will overwhelm any system we have. Iron Dome, David Sling. We can't resist that type of onslaught of missiles. The United States Navy and Air Force are going to get involved. And all you need is one drone, one rocket to hit an American destroyer, an aircraft carrier, and hundreds of Americans are killed. And it's happened in history. Those of you who remember the Sheffield and the Falklands War. One rocket. And America's involved. And Iran is allied with Russia and China. I can see how this spins out all different ways. So they have a legitimate fear. What they don't have legitimate fear about is Iran. And this I don't get. Because now, for 15 years, since 2009, since the advent of the Obama administration and the president's decision in his first week in office, in January 2009, to seek a reconciliation with Iran, his party's position has been not to confront Iran, but to seek reconciliation with Iran. And that meant many things, everything from giving Iran an awful lot of money to signing the nuclear deal to even dismantling the FBI and internal investigation of Iran and Hezbollah drug dealing in this country. It's very disturbing. And we're talking about ignoring hundreds, not dozens, hundreds of Iranian provocations against the United States. Since October 7th, Iranian proxies in Syria and Iraq have fired rockets and drones 180 times at American bases, killed American service people. They've closed the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, one of the most crucial waterways in the world. The Houthi rebels backed by Iran. Has the United States fired one bullet at Iran? Nothing, not one bullet. Now, if you're an Iranian and you're not paying a single price for fomenting mass violence throughout the Middle East, why stop? Really, why stop? Your parents here, kid wrecks his room, here's $20. You think he's going to wreck the room again? Pretty good chance. No, I aim this criticism at the United States. And I say again, those of you who see me on the news, I say all the time, they're making a fundamental mistake. They keep on saying, we need to de-escalate. We need to de-escalate in the Middle East. The way to de-escalate in the Middle East is to escalate against Iran so that Iran understands that if it fires at Israel, if it fires at American troops, if it fires at international shipping, it will pay a prohibitive and immediate price. Otherwise, it's just going to keep on doing it. And I think that empirically unassailable. It is unassailable. And I also fault us. I got to tell you the truth. I've had, for the same 15 years, I've had a steady problem, that's an understatement, with our policy toward Iran. We play by Iran's rules. Iran gets its proxies to fire at us. We fire back at the proxies. The proxies hide behind the civilian population. We kill the civilians. We get branded as war criminals. And Iran gets away scot-free. War after war after war. We have to change the calculus. One bomb, one Iranian bullet crosses our border, and an oil refinery goes up in flames in the Persian Gulf. 2 bullets, 2 refineries. You know who did this great? And this, again, nonpartisan, was Ronald Reagan. 1988, Operation Praying Mantis. Look it up. The Iranians were firing at Kuwaiti tankers. Reagan said, stop it or else. They didn't stop it, and they got or else. The U.S. Navy set ablaze a whole series of oil refineries and sunk half the Iranian Navy. And they stopped. They stopped. No one remembers. Praying Mantis.
So how does this one end, Michael? How does this round end? Look in your crystal ball.
It could end tonight. It's not going to, but it could end the next minute. Hamas accepts the ceasefire deal. That's pretty much on the table. And by the way, the message coming out of Washington again are, Bibi's to blame, Hamas is to blame, he must blame. Depends who you're asking at what moment. Seriously, it's not clear. But say the impossible happens. Hamas agrees to the deal. Netanyahu feels that this is a deal that he can accept. Maybe the government survives, maybe it doesn't. And Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, has said that if Hamas accepts a ceasefire, he'll accept a ceasefire, and the guns go quiet. I don't know for how long, under what conditions. From our perspective, that solves really nothing in the north, because understand, again, this is going to get a little granular here. The status quo ante in the north cannot be resuscitated. It cannot be restored. On October 6th, Hezbollah was sitting along the fence. You could look across the fence, you could touch Hezbollah on the other side. If you're in Metula, I wouldn't recommend you do this. But on the other side of the fence was Hezbollah. And now we know what terrorists who sit on the other side of the fence can do to us and do to our families and our children. So no one's going to go back to Metula if Hezbollah is sitting on the other side of the fence. And Hezbollah is still sitting on the other side of the fence. So a restoration of the status quo ante of October 6th is not going to solve the problems up north. It'll freeze some of the situations in the south, and hopefully we'll get some of the hostages back. The number now is around 30 that we expect to get back. It's women, elderly, infirm. But Hamas is not going to give back all the hostages. They're going to say, we don't have some. We don't know where they are. They're about psychological terrorists. They're much about physical terror. Do you hear what they did with the videos of the hostages they executed the other day? How they released the videos after they were executed? We are dealing with evil. Evil. And that same evil is going to create a situation where after a hostage exchange deal, they'll say, well, we don't know where, Roni is. We don't know where Miriam is. We don't know, You say, yeah, she's on a list, but we don't know. Then we'll find out 1 or 2 years later that they're still there. Because that's the way they operate. And I too, as an historian, not just of Israel, just generally speaking, I've never known a country to face this type of dilemma. Even the dilemma of keeping up pressure on Hamas. We know that what led to the great hostage exchange in November was military pressure on Hamas. But now we also know that putting on too much pressure and the hostages get shot. So at what point is pressure too much pressure? We see an administration that comes out and says Hamas is going to be seriously punished for what it did. And the next day, pressure on Bibi. If you're Sinwar, what is that telling you? Hey, maybe I should execute some more hostages. I'll get more American pressure. Or I'll get bigger demonstrations in Tel Aviv. Has anybody ever heard of anything like this in history? I haven't. How does it end? Well, that was one way it ends. It doesn't end. The other way would be it goes on. It goes on to the point where Israeli leadership, whatever leadership that is, and I personally think the current leadership does not have the legitimacy to actually make this decision. And Israeli leadership reaches a conclusion that Hamas has been so degraded in Gaza that we can withdraw the majority of our troops there, maintain a certain security element, and focus the bulk of our military effort on the north, with the goal of pushing Hezbollah beyond the Litani River. We can't destroy Hezbollah, right? And perhaps taking on Iran in a bigger way, a much bigger way. But understand, a war with Hezbollah in Iran is not 6,000 rockets a day. It can be much more than that. And these rockets are larger, more accurate, and longer range than anything in Hamas's arsenal. Anything. We're talking about a war of a completely different magnitude than what we've experienced in the last year. Much bigger. The big question is, do we have a choice? You know, we in Israel, we think about wars of choice and wars of no choice. And what's interesting about the demonstrations going on, apparently last night's demonstration was 500,000 people. It's a lot of people. They're all calling for Bibi's resignation. They're calling him a murderer, which I think is very, very dangerous as incitement. But that's what's happening. But nobody's out there saying that this was a war of choice. Everybody understands that this is a war that's thrust on us. And polls indicate, it's very interesting, the same people who are calling for a ceasefire in the south are supporting a war in the north. Because they know there's no choice. No choice. There's clarity in that.
And 2 months from now, our country is going to an election. Mm-hmm. How does that impact how this carries on?
I tread carefully here. I don't vote in these elections anymore. I give up my American citizenship, remember? I tread carefully here. It's interesting, you have two parties here and two candidates, both of whom say the war must end. But they say the war must end in a completely different way. One candidate says it ends through negotiations and the release of hostages. The other candidate says it ends by releasing any restraints on Israel so that Israel can quickly defeat Hamas. Now, I don't know actually how that works, the mechanics of that, because, I mean, again, I go back to the debate between my two kids and Hamas hitting us between the two eyes. The easiest thing to have done on October 8th was for the IDF to have gone into Gaza, filled up all the tunnels with gasoline, and someone could have thrown in a match. We still can't do that. I don't care who's president. We still can't do that. But yes, presidential policy, White House policy has been a restraining influence on the course of battle. And you talk to anybody who's fought in Gaza, they'll tell you that. But the other restraint is dangers to our own soldiers, of which we are very, very sensitive to, and dangers to the hostages. So America's not, it is a factor, it is not necessarily the determining factor. There are other determining factors. With regard to the North, we don't know. Anybody who tells me they know what Donald Trump's going to decide, what could I say? Who knows? But there's also a strong isolationist strain within the Republican Party, and we don't know. At the end of the day, we can't outsource our security. At the end of the day, we came back to that ancient homeland on May 4th, 1948, to take charge of our own destiny. And we have to remind ourselves of that. We've made some very important alliances in the Middle East. They're good on a defensive level, but at the end of the day, no one's going to fight our battles for us. We have to fight them alone. We have to fight them alone. We will win them. Of course we'll win. Again, because we have no choice. We'll win them. The big question is, at what cost?
Mm-hmm. You know, that last line reminds me of something that Yossi Klein Halevi said when we had him out here several months ago, and he talked about how the existence of the state of Israel was meant to ensure that it never happens again, right? And so therefore, Israeli mentality is that we are going to be strong. We will never once again portray ourselves as the victims. Now, this bumps into progressive American Jewish values at a certain point when American Jews feel like, hey, we need to be embraced, because in this moment when some of our closest allies, especially on college campuses, are abandoning us, the thinking in a lot of our minds is embrace us as you would any other minority or any other victimized people, but that bumps into the Israeli ethos. So how do you think about this notion of Israelis being strong, Israelis saying we'll never again, once again, be the victims, but American Jews who are so frustrated and sad about their allies leaving them, saying, no, embrace us as victims as well?
It's a great question. Let me just first say, because Tammy's laughing over there, and I'll tell you why she's laughing, because Yossi's my best friend, and we talk at least once a day, sometimes more, and disagree about many things. But if you read his last article in the Times of Israel, he's had a change of heart. He now prioritizes the return of the hostages over destroying Hamas. It's been a big change. It's interesting. Read his arguments, and it's something we could again, that tension is there, even within my relations with Yossi and with Yossi's relationship with himself. It's there. It's always there. And I'm going to say something rather radical that I've never said before in an audience now. Now is the time when we need you to embrace us. We need we got to put our little Zionist pride aside and say, listen, we are really deeply divided. We are hurting at levels that are just incalculable. You know, the day that the 6 hostages were killed, and I've been working with hostage families. I was at Hirsch's funeral. You know, I'm going to start weeping here. But that same day, 3 policemen were killed. One of the policemen who was killed, his daughter was killed defending Sderot on October 7th as a policewoman. Yesterday, 3 Israelis were killed at the Allenby crossing. One of those killed, his son was a survivor of Nova. How do you begin to even describe this type of suffering, this pain? And in the middle of it, we are divided with this crisis of credibility, of loneliness in the world, being accused of committing genocide while defending ourselves against an avowedly genocidal organization. Where we see Jews going up and receiving major prizes for films and condemning us for genocide. What that does for us, how that hurts, and not even mentioning the hostages, We need you right now. We need your love, we need your support, we need your unity. And the degree to which you can put aside your differences, and there are some very deep differences in this community itself. Really, I'm here I want to be embraced, please, rather than the other way around.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think I can speak on behalf of our audience and say we are embracing you with the big hug that we know that you need. Part of tonight was to talk about the heroic actions that do make us proud, and I know you did just have your Miluim service in the North.
No hero, believe me. But I met real heroes.
Real heroes. Talk about some of this, whether it's United Hatzalah or some of the work that was done. Inspire us with some of these stories of people who really are putting everything out there to save our brothers and sisters.
Well, it's the heroes who aren't here to accept our praise. The rabbi who married my daughter, a wonderful rabbi, his 2 sons were officers in reserves. October 7th, they got up, Shabbat, heard what was going on, got into their uniform, said goodbye to their families, went down to Gaza, and both of them were killed that morning. That type of thing. Those heroes who went out and made meals for soldiers, who gave blood, who went to pick fruit. 80% of Israelis went out and volunteered. There was a failure of the state on October 7th, but there was a massive historic success of the state of Israel, the people of Israel, the society of Israel. We are the most resilient and strongest society on earth. 360,000 reservists reported for duty. Reserve units reported between 100 and 150% response to the call-up. It means 50%. Half the people who showed up had already been out of reserve duty. 360,000 Israelis proportionally is the equivalent of 20 million Americans. That is 4 million Americans more than served in all of World War II. No country on the earth like this. I mean, who in Belgium is willing to pick up a rifle and go out and fight for Belgium? All right? Who in the West? And these weren't kids off the street. These were heads of high-tech companies. These were parents. These were family members, right? Went off. What country in the world is like this? That in itself extraordinary. I'm always greatly honored to be an ambassador for United Hatzalah, because United Hatzalah, hundreds of volunteers that day went down to Gaza and violated the army declared like a cordon sanitaire. You couldn't go in there. Oh, no, we're going to go right in there. 2 of them were killed. 2 of them were taken hostages. One of those killed was an Arab. And they continue all the time. That volunteer, it's 24/7. So United Hatzalah represents that same resilience, that same indomitable quality of the Israeli society, which transcends, by the way. It's Arabs, it's Jews, it's religious people, it's ultra-Orthodox people, it's secular people, it's very secular people. That's Israel's society at its best. So the war has revealed some of the less savory qualities about our society, but it also revealed just the immense heroism and volunteerism and the selflessness of the society. And it is unending. I see it all the time. That's extraordinary.
You're all going to have a moment, or some of you are going to have an opportunity in a moment to ask the ambassador some questions, to start thinking about what you want to say. I have a few more questions for you, and then we're going to engage in a conversation. Look, you still maintain this optimism, and I choose the word optimism. I choose the word hope over optimism because the late Jonathan Sachs used to talk about hope being one of these active emotions, and we as a people are an active, tachlis people, the hope. So you maintain this ethos. And I know part of that is because you have a big vision. You wrote a book recently, Israel 2048. I was blessed to be asked to be on the advisory group for this, but you're now sunsetting it and you're making it part of something else. Can you tell us a little bit about, first of all, how your vision for the future plays into this optimism and this hopefulness, but also why you're sunsetting it and what this moment means?
Well, the project 2048, that's Israel's 100th birthday, grew out of a conversation I had in the middle of the night with the Prime Minister. We were just sort of schmoozing in the Knesset, and we were lamenting the fact that Israel, we never really think about our future. We're so bogged down in current crises. Little do we know what a current crisis look like. And we said, well, let's envision what Israel should look like on our 100th birthday in order to ensure us another 100 years, an additional 100 years of prosperity and security. And thought about it until the government fell. And then for a year, I had a 2048 discussion with my buddy Natan Saransky at the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. And then Corona hit, and locked myself in my room for want of anything better to do, and wrote this book. And the book is in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. It's really a manifesto. The English is 80 pages. You read it in an hour, but it's 22 chapters that deal with every aspect of Israel's future. It's social policy, educational policy, the peace process. The longest chapter is on the peace process. Israeli Arabs, American Jews, Israel-Diaspora, and political reform, democracy, big section on democracy,
national
all
service.
in 80s pages.
Yeah.
And we put this out. And the idea was to get a conversation going about Israel's future, particularly among young people. And we created an NGO around it. And we had some fascinating discussions around on 2048. And then October 7th. Suddenly, we had to get bogged down in a crisis. And on the morning of October 8th, around our kitchen table, we established an NGO called Israel Advocacy Group, IAG, to fill in, unfortunately, a vacuum. The state of Israel wasn't doing very much to defend itself in terms of public diplomacy. Today, it's doing nothing. And what began as a group of volunteers around this table has become an NGO, where we operate pretty much around the clock. You've seen me a lot on news. That's part of an IAG operation. But that's the small part of it. Hundreds and hundreds of interviews with CNN, MSNBC, BBC. I don't wish this on anybody. It's also social media. It's generating original content. It is podcasts, webinars, all these things you know and love. But it's also what's called Track 2 diplomacy. Track 2 diplomacy is unofficial diplomacy. We work behind the scenes. So most recently in June, we brought the first ever delegation of displaced people from the north, people from the north, to Washington, D.C. We met with both houses of Congress, both parties, and then we had a meeting with President Biden's staff in the White House. In a week and a half, 2 weeks, Tim, we have the second delegation coming in. Again, we'll go to both houses, both again to the White House, to raise awareness about the North. That's what this is about, raising awareness about the North. So this is what we're doing at IAG. Part of now the discussion of 2048 has been subsumed because we have to start thinking about what happens next. The war will end. The war will end, and Israel is going to have to think about, okay, how can we ensure that this will not happen again? It's not just about destroying Hamas. It's about what went wrong on October 7th, which was profound and endemic and didn't begin on October 7th. Believe me, it was the product of many years of neglect, of complacency, many years, and it can be changed. But someone has to come forth with a vision. I haven't seen the vision yet. Here is the vision. You can disagree with it. I actually invite people to read it and disagree with it. Tam, we have a copy of it there in your bag there? No, it's in the car?
I have a copy here.
And the car, it's a good place for it. Okay, I'd show it to you. You have a copy here? Yeah. We'll show it to you, a copy. It says 2048. So that is where that stands now. And yes, we're very much engaged with 2048. I had a meeting with young, high-tech people just before I left in Tel Aviv to talk about some of these aspects of the future. But clearly, just to give you one small example, Okay, just one small example of things I talked about in the book. It appears in my resume that I was instrumental in bringing the American support for the Iron Dome system. And I'm supposed to be proud about that. But I'm ambivalent. Because Iron Dome is a double-edged sword. On one hand, yes, it protects lives. It saves thousands of Israeli lives, certainly. But it also creates what Hamas loves, which is disproportionality. All right? We kill a lot on their side. They don't kill a lot on our side. So it actually furthers their goal of delegitimizing Israel. But worst of all, it created complacency within the Israeli defense establishment. It made us think defensively and not offensively. So much so, on the morning of October 7th, many people didn't run away from the Nova Festival because they said, hey, we don't have to run away, we've got Iron Dome. And it turns out the Army actually didn't have contingency plans for invading Gaza. And so we wasted 3 weeks trying to figure out what we're going to do. Iron Dome. And I mentioned this in the book. I shared my ambivalence about Iron Dome in the book. This is one small aspect of it.
All right, you have in the audience some of your future Maccabees. This is the future generation. You talked about the Israel Advocacy Group. You talked about the vision for the future. How can they be our foot soldiers? What's the message you want them to take away? What's the tachlis you're giving to our young people?
It's for you guys in the front row. I can't see many of you out there, but these poor people I can actually see. And it's this. I've learned in public life that as immense as any crisis can be, and often is, that there's an equal dimension of opportunity. And what we have now is an opportunity to make those corrections. People often ask me, what war in Israel history sort of is the closest to this war? Is it the 1967 war? Is it the 1973 war when Israel was surprised by the Syrians and the Egyptians? What's closest? And to me, there's a very clear answer. The closest war was Israel's War of Independence, which was fought on multiple fronts, fought in our neighborhoods, fought in our communities for our national survival. This is Israel's second war of independence. That's what's going on here. And as terrible as this crisis is, and sometimes unspeakably terrible, so too immense are the opportunities. What you have, especially your generation, everyone here, but especially the young people here, should wake up in the morning and say to yourself, thank God I'm alive to be a Jewish person at this time in Jewish history, because I have the opportunity to make a difference. I have the privilege to make a difference. I have the zchut, it doesn't translate very well, the right, the privilege to make a difference, because you actually can make a difference. I just mentioned before, how we in Israel need to be embraced by you in the American Jewish community. There's a task, right? There's a privilege to be in a position at this moment to be able to embrace your brothers and sisters in the state of Israel at the time of need. How often does that happen? How often does that happen? And you have the privilege and the right and the opportunity to rebuild, because there's going to be a tremendous amount of rebuilding to do. And damn it, this time we're going to get it right. This time we're going to get it right as best we can.
Amen to that.
There you go.
Thank you, Ambassador Oren. I could keep going, and maybe I will, but I do want to give you a chance to ask the questions that you have. So it looks like Maya's coming. Going to grab a microphone. I don't know how you want to do this, Maya. People raise their hands. Okay, and drawer on this side and that side. So raise your hands. I think that we may want to go with young people first, but that's okay. It's hard to see with the lights. You also, please. We are equal opportunity. Front row here, Dror.
So, I was in the 67 war. I've been around for a long time. What you talked about is more so the present, what has happened to date. But we lack solutions for tomorrow. And that's where the whole issue is with the people who are for the Bibi, against Bibi, and so on and so forth. So where is the wisdom, the Jewish wisdom, to come up with a solution to where we are today? To release the hostages is a very easy thing to do. But that's not what they want. If they tell you that, they lie. And you know that those Arabs are good, life. So you, with all your experience, you go ahead and come up with a solution.
All right. Solution time. There's an easy one for you.
Okay. The solution begins with us, not with the Arabs. Now, people often make a mistake in the United States of assuming that the prime minister is the president. Very different. The president is the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military. He gives an order, U.S. military goes into action. And a good trivia question to ask, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but who is the commander-in-chief of the IDF? Does anybody know? Nope. Nope. Who? No.
It's the
By the way, Israelis don't often get this either.
The cabinet.
The cabinet is the commander-in-chief.
Cabinet.
So it's consensual. All right, in order to get Israelis to send their children and their brothers and their parents off to battle, you actually have to convince them. There's an element of persuasion. There's no order. You can't, it's not a result of executive fiat. So the government, to wage a war, the way we'd have to wage this war, and we're talking about a regional war on multiple fronts, has to have a tremendous amount of legitimacy, a tremendous amount of credibility. This particular government came into October 7th with a credibility deficit because of the great struggle over judicial reform that preceded it. Very, very divisive. And after October 7th, what little credibility it had, it lost. It lost. So basically, it's been operating on legitimacy and credibility fumes. And what's animating so many of the hundreds of thousands of people going out to protest is this lock of, they don't believe a word the prime minister says. He can explain everything he wants. He could actually make, if it was a different politician making the same case, that we cannot give up the Philadelphia route, we cannot give up the Netzarim route, we can't let Hamas retake the Gaza Strip. And in change, we may get 30 hostages now, but five years from now, we're going to lose 5,000 people again. And to say nothing about releasing terrorists from our jails, because we saw what happened with Mr. Sinwar, who was released in the Gilad Shalit deal. And how do we tell the people whose kids and loved ones were killed by those terrorists that those terrorists are going out home free to a hero's welcome, but your kid's going to remain in the ground? How do we do that? How do we not incentivize more terror? A different politician could make that same argument, and people maybe would believe him or her. But right now, we don't have it. So it begins already, first of all, with resolving the question of legitimacy and credibility within the Israeli government, restoring that. Once we've done that, then there is no alternative. There is no alternative that to convince our enemies that it is a terrible idea to try to kill us. I'll tell you a story. Now, some of you know Jeff Goldberg. He's the editor of The Atlantic. Great guy. And after every round of fighting, he would always call me up and said, I get what the tactic is, but what's the strategy? And I said, we say to him, Jeff, you don't understand. The strategy is the tactic. What does it mean? We came into being in May 1948, and Arabs tried to destroy us. And we convinced them that it wasn't a very good idea. And they tried again in 1956, and they tried again in 1967 and 1973. We keep on convincing them it's not a good idea. And some of them internalize that it's not a good idea, and they make peace with us. Not all of them. And in between these bouts of reminding our enemies that it's not a good idea to try to kill us, we develop what is, by any international standard, one of the most super successful states on the planet Earth. I can go into a half an hour of the criteria for establishing what is a successful state. Not the least of which is we can drink the water coming out of our taps. It's better than anything in a bottle. All right? Super successful. And who knows? You know, one of the frequently asked questions I used to get in the news all the time, aren't you, by bombing Gaza, aren't you creating the next generation of terrorists? Yeah, maybe. But by bombing other Arabs, we got peacemakers. So we don't know. In fact, if you adduce history as Exhibit A, the evidence is on the side of peacemakers and not on more terrorists. Who knows? So it begins at home, reestablishing legitimacy and credibility, and then in terms of our enemies, reestablishing deterrence. And the knowledge that trying to kill us is a really bad idea.
Thank you. All right, on this side, Maya, you have somebody? Yeah, there you go. Back. It's very hard to hear, to see.
Okay.
it's difficult to get this information, but to the extent that they reveal it, the average Palestinian on the street supports Hamas. At least
Not
if
so
you-
difficult. There are polls. There's the Shikaki Institute
Yeah.
in Ramallah that does polls, okay? You can say the polls are accurate. Not. In the West Bank, much, much higher than in Gaza, but Gaza, you know, in the high 40s.
If that were 2% instead of in the high 40s, would it be different?
Here you get to it's going to sound like a difference without a distinction, but the Palestinians who don't support Hamas may also support armed resistance, which we call terror.
What if 2% supported armed resistance and
Okay,
the
that would
rest?
make a big, big difference. You know,
What's
you listen.
happening in regard to making that change? Is there any effort at attitude change of the Palestinians?
Where's that from our point? What are we
Yeah.
supposed to do about it? I don't know. I'll give you two examples. I mean, we listen to all these people on your campuses, spokesmen for the Palestinians, spokesmen for the Palestinians in this country. They talk about occupation. They talk about injustice. They talk about apartheid. They talk about genocide. Have you heard any of them come out and say, "Gee, I really want to live at peace with Israelis"?
Right.
I'm trying to think of one. Maybe you can, but not many, if there are.
Right.
My desire is to live side by side in an independent Palestinian state that's going to live in peace. I don't hear that. I was in Knesset. I chaired a very classified committee on foreign affairs. We dealt with very sensitive issues, and one of the issues we dealt with was the Palestinian Authority education system. Not the Hamas education system, but the Palestinian Authority education system. Now, I've been through a couple of wars, a lot of terrorist attacks. I came out of those discussions sick to my stomach. Sick to my stomach. I can't begin to describe what it was like, how the Palestinian Authority is teaching its children not to cut Jews' throat, but how to cut a Jew's throat in great detail. Great detail. Now, you tell me how we can impact that. How do we get them to change those textbooks? How do we change the mind of a Palestinian young person who's been taught from age 2 that the most sacred act he can commit is by cutting that Jew's throat? That's very, very difficult. And it's a process that's not going to happen overnight. One of the things we can really do is dismantle UNRWA. UNRWA is one of the great causes. UNRWA is one of the great sources of the conflict. One of the great sources of the conflict. It doesn't teach peace. It doesn't teach coexistence. It doesn't teach the two-state solution. It teaches the return. And by teaching the return, you're talking about destruction of the state of Israel. The fact that many of the teachers, are actually Hamas people, leave that aside. UNRWA perpetuates the conflict. And in so many ways, I could spend an hour talking about UNRWA, but it's really something you can do if you want to really think about solving this project. The longest section of 2048 deals with the two-state solution and the peace process. And I've been involved. I was an advisor to Yitzhak Rabin. I've been involved in the peace process now for more than 30 years. I would participate in the last round of negotiations with the Palestinians. I was even an advisor on the Trump plan. By the way, it was a terrific plan. And really, even Tom Friedman says it was a terrific plan. It really does. And Tom Friedman says it's a terrific plan. And the Palestinians missed an opportunity with it. We should go back and revisit it. It's a two-state solution plan. But, and when I've come to understand some things about the peace process that you can never learn in a classroom, and I'll just give you one little story. I'm in these negotiations with Sai Barakat. I want to say Allah v'shalom, but not exactly. And he said something that made me realize that 95% of what we're talking about is malarkey, right? Because he says to me the following. He says, you want us to recognize you as a Jewish state. And that was a core demand. That was the only way we could get mutual. We were going to recognize them as the Palestinian state. We wanted them to recognize us as the Jewish state. It was the demand of Barak, Zibi Livni, and Bibi. You want us to recognize you as a Jewish state, but you don't understand that by doing that, you're asking us to negate our own identity. And I said, boom, light bulb goes off. We're talking about borders, we're talking about settlements, we're talking about Jerusalem. That's not what this is about. It's about identity. We wake up in the morning, every morning, and we're Israelis, Jews, not because we're not Palestinians. They're waking up and saying they're Palestinians because they're not us. Go solve that one easily. Go solve that one easily.
Okay, gonna go back to this side of the room. George.
Yeah, on the right.
There we go.
Thank you. What do you think is really motivating Bibi, and what evidence do you have of that?
I don't. You know something? It's a great question, and I ask myself that every morning. What is motivating Bibi? Because so the conventional wisdom is, and we hear this from very serious people. He's doing what he's doing in order to perpetuate his time in office. Wants the war to keep going, so he doesn't have to face him. Go to these court cases and be civilian. As I said before,
Right.
Civilian Bibi and not the Prime Minister Bibi. I don't know. Also, the Netanyahu I work with now quite a few years ago is not necessarily the same person we know today. And as I said, as I intimated earlier, maybe a different person making the exact same arguments would be believed. Because the arguments are compelling. They are. They just are. Because if Hamas would accept a deal, it's a big if, it can only be on one condition, that is Hamas wins. And what does that mean for the state of Israel? Not just for the people who won't move back to Sderot, all right? And they won't go back to Sderot, like my banker would not move to Sderot, right? What does it mean for our regional deterrence? What does it mean for Judea and Samaria and the West Bank? If Hamas wins, you think the West Bank's not going to go up in flames? Of course it is. And what does it mean for our peace initiatives? Because the signatories to the Abraham Accords didn't sign those agreements because they love us. They don't wake up in the morning and sing Hatikva. Okay? They signed those agreements because we are standing up to their twin existential threats, which is Sunni extremism, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and Shiite extremism, Iran and Hezbollah. There's only one country in the Middle East standing up to both of them, it's us. And will they sign peace agreements with us if we lose? Okay? If we lose to Hamas? Think about it.
So what
So
is
all
it?
of these issues, so another person, you say, okay, these are compelling arguments made by a different person. But right now, unfortunately, when he speaks, at least half the population of Israel doesn't support him. An interesting poll taken this week not only showed that the same people protesting to end the war in Gaza want to start a war in the north, but another poll showed that 49% of Israelis, opposed to 43%, prefer to keep the Israeli presence along the Philadelphia route instead of giving up the hostages. So Netanyahu was actually representing a majority Israeli opinion. But you wouldn't know that from the protests.
So what does it mean for us to support you without knowing, with so much confusion about what's motivating Bibi? Like, what does it mean for the American community to be there for you?
But what do you mean when you say you?
Well,
Me?
for Israel.
Please support me.
Israel.
But
How can we be who you want us to be?
I want you to support the people of Israel, the society of Israel. You don't have to support any government. You don't necessarily have to support any policy. What you have to do is support is our right to defend ourselves and our right to exist. And understanding that the issue of how best to defend ourselves and who is to lead that quest will be a source of dissension within the state of Israel.
Thank you.
You don't have to get involved in that.
Okay,
You go.
coming back this way.
Thank you so much for this, for being here and for all what you do. And I had a comment, and I don't know if it's a question or not, but in the press, of course, and this has been ongoing for decades, Israel has always been pointed as the bad country, the bad one. But the press never shows the reality. Like, for instance, there is no country who's going to tell an enemy, civilians, go hide. No country does that. But my question is, Israel is so tiny, small country, so beautiful, surrounded by Muslim countries. We as Jewish feel that we are all brothers and sisters. Why the surrounding Muslim countries do nothing for the Gazawi and let them die? So,
Qatar's done an awful lot.
I'm sorry.
Qatar's done an awful lot, unfortunately. Yeah.
So,
Sometimes with Israeli acquisition. Let me address this. Let's talk about the press for a second, because I deal a lot with the press and have for now decades. And yes, you can say the press, it's a generalization. There are press outlets that are very pro-Israel, fewer than there used to be. In 1967, the press was overwhelmingly pro-Israel, amazing. They didn't even know what the Palestinian was back in 67. The press generally tends to be left of center. It tends to be critical of the West, not just of Israel, but is especially critical of Israel, because Israel is judged by a completely different standard, and you know this. So I sit on various intergovernmental agencies, different ministerial agencies, and I'm always the down guy. What do I say? They go around the thing, how should we fight this paper? How should we fight this? How should we respond to this headline, that headline? And it gets to be my turn, and I say, I got some really, really bad news for you. We are the Jewish state. And if you look behind so many of the headlines, you will see classic anti-Semitic tropes, but classic. For example, I mean, just the Hamas numbers, okay? Wonderful professor from the University of Pennsylvania named Adi Weiner, who will prove to you mathematically that Hamas's statistics are statistically impossible. Now, that doesn't make, the press cites them, uncritically all the time. By the way, everything we assert, they say, we could not confirm this, okay? You ever say that? They always add that rider. But 40,000 people killed, 40,000 people killed. Okay. Even though that 40,000 includes 18,000 terrorists that we killed, and includes the 5,000 people who die of natural causes over 2.5 million over the course of 11 months. And so what you're left with is a 1-to-1 ratio of combatant to civilian death, which has never been equaled by any other army in history. Okay? Forget all that. What is behind the headline that says Israel bombed a certain area in Gaza and X number of children were killed? Always children. You ever notice that? Always children. Why? Because Jews kill children. Because in the New Testament, 144,000 children were killed by an evil Jewish king. Jews killed children. It's the blood libel. Over and over and over again. And I say to this in these committees, I got some really bad news for you. We are not fighting the Western press. We're not fighting millions of bots issued by Russia and China. We're not fighting the resources of 1.4 million Muslims. We are fighting 2,500 years of anti-Semitism. That doesn't mean we can afford to stop fighting. But we have to be realistic what we're up against. We have to be realistic what we're up against. The protests on campus you ask these kids whether they're anti-Semitic, I would say 95% of them say, no, some of my best friends. Here, the guy from JVP is protesting right next to me, he's my buddy. No. The protests themselves are fundamentally anti-Semitic. No one's protesting Russia's invasion of Ukraine. No one's protesting the fact that China has put 1 million Muslims in concentration camps. No one cares about Sudan. No one cares about Afghanistan. Nobody cares about Syria. It's fundamentally anti-Semitic because they are singling out Israel. Forget the fact that everything they're saying about Israel is a lie. Besides that, just the existence of the protests themselves is anti-Semitism. And we are awash in it. We have my good buddy Jonathan Greenblatt came to visit this week, and we're discussing how the world has changed and how the model of ADL has changed because I'm involved in ADL because the model of ADL used to be exposing and shaming anti-Semites. What do you do in a world where anti-Semites aren't ashamed? They're actually proud. Is Susan Sarandon ashamed of being an anti-Semite? No, they're proud. And what do you do, in a world that has come to really been what I think of a reversion to form? Because the world in which we're living in now would have been very readily recognizable to my great-grandparents in Lithuania and Poland. Yeah, the world hates Jews. And it makes you think that maybe we're living in an interesting interregnum. There's an interregnum in history where, after the Holocaust, kind of anti-Semitism was rather unsavory, but now it isn't anymore. Now it's kind of socially acceptable. And we're back to where we were, 100, 150 years ago. A world that we knew. Okay, let's deal with it. Let's deal with it. Let's not just bemoan it, let's fight it. First of all, fight it in a Churchillian sense. You can fight it in the press. You can fight it in the legislature. You can fight it in the finances of your alumni, your campus, your alma mater. You can fight it in so many different ways. I mean, who would ever thought, we could take down the presidents of, 4 or 5 Ivy League colleges now? Really. You have a lot of tools at our disposal. Fight it. But another way to fight it, and the way that I kind of prefer to fight it, is the way my great-grandparents fought it. That is by strengthening ourselves as Jews, by investing in Jewish education. That's the best way to fight anti-Semitism. Because at the end of the day, we're not going to shame these people. We're not going to educate most of them. But we can make ourselves much stronger. That's what we can do.
All right. I know we could go on and on and on. Many of you had hands up that you didn't get a chance, but we are past the time, and I think that that's such a great, wonderful, positive note to end on. I will give you one more final word,
Oh, boy.
Ambassador, if you'd like, but this note of Jewish pride, Jewish education, fighting the negativity, the anti-Semitism by ensuring that our young people will always be proud. Put the exclamation point at the end of that.
I'll go back to what I was telling these unfortunate young people in the front row who I can see.
They're all one family. They're good
Oh,
with
one
that. That's
family?
okay.
That's
It's
it. You've had it.
No.
I also very privileged. I'm privileged to have two perspectives, okay? I have an historical perspective of a country that comes into being on May 14th, 1948 with no allies, no resources, no nothing, and creates this. And I mentioned the water coming out of the tap, but I should also mention the fact that we have an army that's more than twice as large as the British and French armies combined. It's a citizens' army. That 3 of our 7 universities just made it into the top 100 universities in the world. How about that one? The others are in the top 500. That technology. You can't envision the 21st century without the state of Israel. That Israel is on a very short list of countries that has never known a second of non-democratic governance. And we're the only country on that list that's never known a second of peace. And I think that's one of the greatest accomplishments of the state of Israel. Think about that. In the Middle East. That's my historical perspective. Okay? I can see that. Then I'm privileged to have a personal perspective. Nar hayiti gam zikanti. I've been living in Israel for close to a half a century. I came to a country that was smoldering. And that's a generous word for it in the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War. Had no economy, had no foreign relations, no relations with India, China. There was an entity called the Soviet Union, remember it? 12 countries, had no relations with them, all hostile. No relations with Africa. Africa cut off all relations with us after the Yom Kippur War. Arab boycott. Nothing with South Africa. No peace with Egypt. No peace with Jordan. A nice relationship with the United States, but not a strategic alliance with the United States. 3 million Jews caught behind the Iron Curtain. 100,000 Jews caught in Africa. No high tech. Our biggest export item was orange juice. The food was terrible. Even the falafel was bad. And look what I've witnessed. In my lifetime. 1 million Jews coming to freedom in the land of Israel. Over 100,000 Ethiopian Jews airlifted to Israel. Peace. Peace with Egypt, Jordan. 4 signatories to the Abraham Accords. Renewal of the relationship with Africa, and I was greatly privileged to be part of that process, one after another. Israel's emergence as a technological powerhouse. The creation of the U.S.-Israel Strategic Alliance, and I'll say this without reservation, is the deepest and most multifaceted strategic alliance which the United States has had with any foreign power in the post-World War II period, in spite of what's happened this year. You can't, give me 2 hours and I'll start talking about it. And, when the tourism come back, they're going to come back for culinary tours of Israel, which I think is the funniest thing, that people come for Israel for the food. That is amazing. That is amazing. If you have these two perspectives, as I have, you can't help but be not just hopeful, but optimistic. Excuse me, Rabbi Sachs. Because I've seen us overcome. Oh my God, the things we have overcome. Second Intifada, which lasted for 5 years, and we came this close to losing the country. We barely know it now. Really, we better think about it. Came this close. No one went out for a restaurant. No one went to a movie. This close. Yom Kippur War, in 3 weeks, we lost twice as many Israelis as we've lost in this entire war. And that was a population that's a quarter of what it is now. We came back from it. It doesn't mean we have not in exquisite pain right now. We're in exquisite pain right now. But I've seen us rebound, because that's what the Jewish people have done for 3,000 years. There's no exception right now. No exception right now. So that's my source of optimism, my source of faith. It helps to also believe. It helps. And that's Netzach Yisrael. But that's it. And if I can leave you with any message, it's my perspectives. My perspectives in the sense that you, not just you, everybody here, is privileged to be a Jew alive at this moment. This is the moment where you step up and become part of Jewish history.
Thank you, Ambassador Michael Oren, everybody.